I'll turn it over to Mary Jimenez to kick things off. And I'm assuming, Mary, your team will be sharing their screen.
Yes, good morning, Kim. I'll give a moment. If you can hear me okay, I'll give a moment for the other presenters to pull up the presentation if they have it.
We can.
Thank you. And I'll see if I can find my camera share too somewhere. Okay, I can see the presentation. Thank you, Darren. Can others see it okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So good morning, everyone. This is Mary Jimenez with DWR. Really pleased to be part of the coordinating committee today and enjoyed Hillary's presentation on behalf of the CVFPB. And also excited to introduce and make some remarks here for the technical team on the CVFPB. That's a really good analog, I think, to what Hillary just presented. A bulk of really important content supporting the flood plan update today. So the CVFPB technical team has been making good progress, completing the technical analyses for the 2022 update, according to the scope that was shared and engaged with partners on earlier in 2019 and 2020 as we were getting going. So as mentioned in those earlier engagements, the technical analysis update is leveraging and updating the deep body of work from 2017 to reflect significant changes in the flood system, while also including some key enhancements to maintain the overall usefulness of the tools and data to DWR and our partners for flood management planning efforts. This will sound familiar to a couple points that Hillary made, but I'll apply it to the technical analysis as well. So just like in 2017, the technical work isn't about project selection or project design, but instead it is meant to help reinforce why there is a need for a system scale approach in the CVFPB and a diverse portfolio of actions needed to reduce flood risk in the Central Valley. So as a blueprint that guides program level priorities and development of future projects, the technical work presented here is really meant to show how it all fits and works together across the system and is meant to be viewed at a high level. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce some key members of our technical team today to provide the update. For folks who have not met him already, Darren Bonfontaine is a senior engineer with our Division of Floodplain Management Program. Darren's role for the CVFPB is leading update specifically of the channel hydraulics portion of the technical analysis for the Sacramento River Basin. He is accompanied today by Roman Medley, who folks I know have seen before. He's a senior engineer with our Division of Planning Climate Change Program, and also Steve Cowden, our economist from the Division of Multi-Benefit Initiatives and the CVFPB program. So very pleased to introduce the other speakers today. And if everything is a go, I will hand off to Darren. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. I'm playing with my screen sharing at the moment, so thank you for the introduction. Let me make sure I can share my screen and see everything I need to see. Just give me 1 second. Let's see. Then I will be turning on my PowerPoint. Can you hear me okay, Mary? Is that at least working?
Yes, you sound clear to me.
Oh, good. Oh, good. And you can see me. I wore my collared shirt today. Hold on a second.
Yes.
All right, let's give it a shot here. All right, now are you just seeing the
presentation? We're seeing both.
Both presentation and my notes. Roman, you have the presentation, don't you?
Hi, Darren. This is Ryan Jones with the board. I do presentations sometimes, and what can happen is, if you're using two screens, sometimes one will be showing on one, and the notes will be shown on the other. So if you play from start and you can duplicate the PowerPoint, we should be able to see the presentation. Oh, or
Yeah, I think Roman's got my back here. We're gonna tag team.
Can you see it right now?
Yes, absolutely. Looks good.
Okay.
So yeah, so then we'll just we'll work through this way. I'll let you know if I need you to advance the slide. I appreciate you having me today, board and stakeholders. I'm happy to be here with my colleagues and if I'm presenting this technical analysis work, we'll be going through the updates to the technical analysis for the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, this 2022 update. And go to the next slide. DWR has assembled a multidisciplinary team to conduct the analyses. Those of you who have participated in previous updates may not recognize me. My name is Darren Bonfontaine, as previously introduced, and this is my first go around with CVFPP, working on this the last 2 years. You will recognize, as Mary said, Roman mainly, and Steve Cowden, who are with me today to provide more detail. Although our division names have changed since the last update, we have pulled together our experts in the Central Valley. We have the Division of Flood Management, Division of Multi-Benefit Initiatives, Division of Planning, and our Climate Change Group working together on the analysis. We're in partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Hydrologic Engineering Center. We'll go over their role later on. We've also assembled an independent panel charged with providing a review of the climate change methodology, consisting of experts from Scripps Institute of Oceanography, the Desert Research Institute, and UC Davis. And we appreciate you having us record this section for them, for their benefit. So the computational effort to incorporate climate change, rainfall runoff, flow and stage frequency, and ultimately life safety and flood damages is a heavy lift. Our consulting team, consisting of GEI, HDR, Jacobs, and RMA, have been working tirelessly to get us to this point. Satya Gala and Kwabena Asante from GEI, as well as Nathan Pingle and Joanna Liu from HDR are also here today to provide input. And then we have Edelman and Kearns and West, who are also on the team to help communicate the technical efforts. So a quick overview of what we would like to cover today entails reviewing the key components of the flood risk assessment. There are a lot of moving parts, and we want to make sure to bring our stakeholders along with us by breaking down our chain of models and analyses into digestible categories. Cover the evolution of the CBFPP technical analyses. I'm sure there are some excellent historians in the audience today regarding the timeline and details of the CVFPP and its roots in the basin-wide feasibility studies, but I will offer a quick rundown of the highlights. What was learned from the 2017 update? We want to take those lessons into our current work, and we'll spend the bulk of all our time today to focus on the areas of enhanced analyses that our team has produced for this 2022 update. Primarily, an update and enhancement to the climate change analysis based on our previous 2017 methodology, but this time with more resolution and focus on uncertainty. Updated inventory of structures in the floodplain that has allowed us to provide much needed detail in the analysis, where we can eliminate some of the guesswork from previous iterations. And ultimately, the risk analysis. This is why we're here. The chain of models and data lead us to this point for the purpose of quantifying the system improvement and how those impact our local populations. So yeah, next slide, please. All right, so this slide lets me chuckle a bit and gives me a chance to poke some fun at my industry and colleagues. We get very excited about the details and the analysis we've been working on for the last 2 years, but we as H&H engineers have challenges communicating a very complex process. But you know, it's so satisfying once it comes together. I think we get pretty excited and want to dig into the details, and then you know, you get all the inputs, and I think from the outside sometimes it seems like there's this miracle that happens, and then we have an end decision. So our goal here is to elaborate on that miracle and really open up the process and give more detail as we go along. You know, the Central Valley from north to south really exhibits all the complexities of modern life and water management on a scale as large as some countries. So we want to make sure that we keep in mind the scale of this effort, as much of you know, within your backyards. Moving on, at the base of our system analysis and our understanding of system performance in the San Joaquin and Sacramento River systems is the Central Valley Hydrology Study. The CVHS dataset gives us a uniform starting point and a framework for how to apply atmospheric changes to this records dataset to ultimately achieve a baseline and future assessment of flood risk. So walking through that a little bit, the atmospheric processes are modeled and translated or downscaled to our rainfall runoff model resolution to determine changes in hydraulic system response. The resulting frequency of flow and channel stage is paired with geotechnical probability of levee failures to relate to floodplain depth. And the overlay of population and structure economic data on that floodplain depth probability for baseline and future conditions gives us the metric we need to measure performance of improvements to the system, as depicted in our life safety and flood damages results. We shouldn't forget that our system is tidal. Many of us in these areas know this very well. We're looking at sea level rise, and that will influence the stage frequency results. A bit of history in how we came to this point. The first Central Valley Flood Protection Plan was adopted in 2012. In 2012, the analysis was primarily dependent on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers comp study data and tools. And it was focused on the evaluation of flood mitigation strategy alternatives. In 2017, the first update to the plan incorporated more resolution based on tools and data developed in the post-Hurricane Katrina era. The analysis integrated Central Valley Hydrology Study data and models, the Central Valley Floodplain Evaluation and Delineation data and models, and the urban levee evaluations and non-urban evaluations data sets, levee data sets. The analysis took the selected alternative for the system and refined its definition and created a framework for the analysis. Now for 2022, we're refining the analysis further. The system configuration has not changed, but we are bringing more focus to the analysis and improving the understanding we have of the system. We are building off the models from 2017 and enhancing the processes that need updating. Next slide. A major refinement along the cycle of enhancements from 2012 to the present has been climate change. The science has come a long way and is constantly evolving, as we know. And the CVFPP, being on a 5-year cycle, is capturing this evolution along the way. In 2012, pilot studies were used to assess the vulnerabilities associated with a 30% increase in flood magnitude. Not a lot of detail, but still looking at impacts. In 2017, the technical team built the chain of models that we in this region have become more familiar with over the last 5 years. The analysis focused assessing the late century flood vulnerabilities for flood increases based on median projections of precipitation and temperature changes. Now for 2022, we're focused on updating the chain of models to assess flood vulnerability for a range of future climate scenarios. The integration, so a few key takeaways from 2017 to pull forward with us into this update. The integration of detailed data from CVHS, CBFED, and the ULI-NULI programs enhanced the analysis capabilities tremendously. And investment in these system-wide tools is greatly beneficial. Life safety is really where the plan needs to focus to determine the benefits of improvements to the system. A structure inventory update would improve the resolution of the analysis. And we can't avoid it. Climate change is a major driver in future risk. It will benefit subsequent analyses to reflect the uncertainty that climate change contributes to the risk analysis. And I think, the discussion with Hillary's investment strategy presentation is a great segue into this. So for the 2022 CVFPB update, you can switch the slide. We are focusing on where we are enhancing the chain of models from 2017. The primary goal is to evaluate current and future flood risk, and we can't forget that. That's the main path to the deliverable. In addition, we can utilize the chain of models to gain more system knowledge in separate analyses, not directly tied to the risk analysis. We've highlighted all of them there, but we'll just go through the elements that have changed. I'll just stay on this one for a bit here. Starting with hydrology, this is the headwater start to the analysis. We're refining the future precipitation and temperature comparisons for scaling the hydrologic inputs into the rainfall runoff model. We have generated multiple climate scenarios to carry through the flow frequency analysis and the risk analysis to address uncertainties in the predictions. We have enhanced the rainfall runoff outputs to report more detailed snowline data to achieve a better understanding of the composition of predicted runoff increases. Roman is here to provide more detail on this topic. And we have also conducted a reservoir vulnerability analysis that will be presented at a later date. We won't have any detail here today, but in it, we evaluated the reservoir response to climate change to gain a better understanding of the capacity of the reservoirs and the downstream system response. The tidal flow downstream condition of the delta is impacted by the effects of sea level rise. These sea level rise analyses have been enhanced to meet new guidelines and provide more detail for risk analysis in our delta communities. And Roman will also elaborate on this topic. The geotechnical properties of the levees with known improvements have been reevaluated and the probability of failure has been updated as appropriate. The channel hydraulics relationship of stage and flow remain the same as in the 2017 analysis, but the economics portion of the analysis has now benefited from an enhanced structure inventory and population data in the floodplain, plus refined methods for accounting for evacuation behavior, which provide an enhanced view of the flood risk in the Central Valley. And Steve Cowden will cover these sections. So I think if you go to the next slide, just a quick recap, climate change analysis, like we talked about, we're looking at a range. We're looking at a range of climate change. We're looking a dry, a low, median, and high estimate of climate change, carrying that through to the flow frequency analysis and how that impacts the flood risk calculation, and reporting that flood risk uncertainty as a band of future conditions, potential future conditions. We've updated geotechnical information as described. We'll get into more detail. Updated the structure inventory and population data. And we've refined the life safety analysis with modernized tools and decision making. So with that, I'll pass over to Roman. And Roman, I can share my screen at this point probably. And
I'm fine.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So good morning, President Edgar, board members, stakeholders. As Mary mentioned, my name is Roman Mendley. I'm a senior water resources engineer working under the Division of Planning, more specifically under the climate change program of the department. I'm leading the Climate Action Plan Phase 2, which is our way to try to align and have consistency throughout the department on how we're approaching climate change and make sure that we're using the best available science. While we are in a drought here in California right now, I think the events in Europe remind us that we are always subject to flood no matter what, and the footprint of climate change is starting to be more and more relevant in our conversation. So I'm going to start with the inland climate change, and then later on talk about sea level rise. And I'm going to. So the methodology that we use for 2022 really follows the 2017 approach, and I'm going to provide a synopsis of how we're doing it and some high-level technical information. But I'm not going to dive into all the details because that will take way too much time. So the first step on our climate change approach is to gather data information from general circulation models and with different greenhouse gas emission concentration pathways. So in total, like 64 general models of future conditions. We use information who has been downscaled to the ground to the 6 kilometer or 3.75 miles. And then we do a ensemble selection of these general circulation models to give us a sense of where we may head along for the median condition and two other scenarios that I will describe later on. So we gather the statistic information from the temperature and precipitation from a historical standpoint, as well as a future condition based on 2072. We use a long time series and we perturb this long time series and apply it to a rainfall runoff model, which is very detailed at a watershed level. There is 8,000 grids, again, are determined by 6 kilometer range. And then we run 97 years of daily data for the baseline, or like the historical data, with our climate change scenarios. So with this information, we are able to develop unregulated flow frequency curve, fit the statistic along it, and then try to compare this curve to be able to apply it to the Central Valley Hydrologic Study, the CVHS. And we often refer to the climate change factors. They are really, a division of the projected peak volume for a specific annual exceedance probability and duration over a historical peak volume for the same annual exceedance probability and durations. So these climate change factors are going to be applied to the unregulated flow frequency curve of the CVHS hydrology. And the unregulated regulated relationship being already known, we can start to have a better understanding of how climate change will affect our system. So let's go step by step. So the future climate change scenario in 2017, we used the underlying data was from the CMIP5, which is our best information on the global models. And we use the bias-corrected spatial designation data, downscale data in our analysis. We also use a median condition, centered at 2085, so late century. We also call it a central tendency because it's not a true median. It's really trying to find like the center point of where we're heading. For the 2022, one of the big improvements is we're using the LOCA downscaling data. And when we compare the BCSD and the LOCA, at the end of the day, they don't make a major change. And so when you compare the results, at least on the unregulated flow frequency curve standpoint, you'll see that the median for the 2022 plan and 2017 plan are very similar. However, the timeline that we're using is slightly different. We are using a 50-year projection. So since the plan is being released in 2022, we are projecting to 2072. And then we also wanted to provide a range of future condition. So we're using a low condition, which is less warming and drier condition, and a high with more warming and water condition. And that's to try to understand not quite the bookend, because you may always fall outside this range. We might, I don't have the statistic behind it, but we are already on the edge. We're somewhat on the edge. So this graphic this slide shows how temperature and precipitation change for the climate change scenarios. Each dot on this graph represents each grid cell for a total of about 8,000 grid cells representing the whole Central Valley. And the value represents the average change in precipitation and temperature for the simulated period under the three climate change scenarios. So as you have noticed, certainly, temperature is rising. And for the low, the less warming, drier condition, the temperature range from like 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit increase. The median from 4 to 6.5 degrees Fahrenheit. And then for the more warming water condition from 6 degrees Fahrenheit to up to 9 degrees Fahrenheit. You also notice that, for the more warming water condition, we increase like the precipitation up to 20% from the average precipitation. So all this information is just a snapshot of these 97 years of data that we are feeding into the runoff model on an average standpoint. But the data, the underlying data, is already on daily timestamp. The next slide is about like our rainfall runoff model. So we have this big model that has been calibrated for like the major events in the valley, and also represent like the dry condition. And we ran 97 years at the daily time step for the baseline and the free climate change scenario. The key output from this model is the daily actual evapotranspiration, the soil moisture, base flow, snowpack, and runoff. And I'm going to like show a little bit of some of the results that we had. So this slide shows how temperature change with elevation during the 97 event for the no climate change scenario and the free future scenarios. The top graph shows the average temperature at different elevation in the Sacramento Basin, and the bottom graph shows the average temperature at different elevation for the San Joaquin Basin. The black line, which is at the bottom of each graph, shows a no climate change. The red line at the top is a high climate change scenario. And I'm going to keep these colors throughout the presentation. The blue and the green in between are the low and the median, respectively. And then you have the black dotted line, which shows the freezing points. So if you look at the Sacramento basin graphic, you will notice that the further climate change scenario moves from low, medium to high, from the freezing point temperature, and if you look at the freezing point temperature for like the no climate change, we were around like 5,000 feet, and for the more extreme scenario, this freezing point moved to like 10,000 feet of elevation, or even 12. Same trend on the San Joaquin side, where the freezing point moved from like 8,000 up to like 12,000 feet. This means that the watershed is getting warmer in the future, and as a result, less of the watershed will be below freezing temperature for during future storms. This next graph shows how much snow is accumulated at different elevation for the 97 storm under the no climate change on 3 future scenarios. The top graph is again the Sacramento Basin at Elk Slough, and the bottom is the San Joaquin River below Stanislaus River. As we have seen in the previous slides, the watershed are warmer, which means less rainfall will be stored as snow. And that's true, even more true for the high scenario under in the Sacramento Valley, where you can see that almost no snowpack has been accumulated during these storm events. In the San Joaquin, the snow water equivalent has greatly reduced, but there's still like some important quantity of snow accumulation. But it's still a big reduction. So if you look at the snapshot of during May 1st, which is our when we have the peak average snowpack accumulation, and we compare the no climate change to the median, you can see that like the snowpack largely decrease in the winter snow during the snow. There is a large decrease in snowpack accumulation. And the snow water equivalent on May 1st is even shorter. So there is much more, most of the winter snow melts by early spring. And so you're going to have the compound effect of, the event itself plus the runoff as snowpack, of the snowpack. And that's what we show in this slide, the runoff relationship with the elevation band. So these guys show how much runoff is generated at each elevation band for the 97 events, for the no climate change, and the 3 future scenarios. Sacramento River on the top, San Joaquin on the bottom. The warmer temperature means more of precipitation is converted to runoff immediately without being stored as snow. You can see that in the Sacramento Basin, there is a slight increase in runoff for the low and medium climate change scenarios. But there's a substantial increase in runoff for the high climate change scenario. So we kind of pass a tipping point at some level between the median and the high, where there is really only a big jump in our runoff. You'll see also in the Sacramento River that for the low climate change scenario, we have runoff who are lower than the baseline actually. And that's because we decrease the amount of precipitation for our data sets. For the San Joaquin Basin, the zone of peak runoff generation moved from 5,000 feet. I think that was around like the peak of the runoff, if you look at the black line, to 9,000 feet. That means that, the snow, the warming really increase and create more runoff from the higher elevation. So how that translates to stream flows. So this slide shows the stream flow at 2 locations, unregulated flows, I want to say, at 2 locations, one in the Sacramento side and one in the San Joaquin. So in Sacramento, you can see that the low climate change scenario almost match the no climate change scenario because we're reducing, while we're increasing the temperature, we're also reducing the amount of precipitation, and so they are almost matching. But for the high climate change scenario, you have a large increase in stream flows. For the San Joaquin, for the high scenario, we double the peak of the runoff of the stream flows. So this major increase in runoff in general. Joe, do you have a question? Or do I continue?
I have a question. Are these flows unregulated flows, or what are they?
They are unregulated flows.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So once we have these 97 years of data running through our hydrologic model, unregulated, we are able to extract annual maximum volume and fit statistical distribution to these flows. We review the curves and computed ratios in a three-phase approach. The first one is like to make sure that we fit volume frequency curve. We review each set of volume and the frequency given a climate change scenario, so a low, medium, and high, for a site consistency, and we adjust the outliers and statistic as needed. Then the second phase is to review the consistency of the volume frequency curve on initial climate change ratios between the CBHS hydrology to the baseline of this scenario, and then the baseline to the low to medium to high conditions. And
I have a question about that.
Yes.
So, if I understand, you took the historical record and then you updated it with climate change and computed new frequency curves. Is that right?
Correct.
And then you extrapolated those curves. Is that correct? To come up with 200-year, 500-year, whatever.
We fit the curve, and the the feeding of the curve will extrapolate the projection, like the fits. Yeah.
So I think that's the Achilles heel of this whole analysis, is you're extrapolating log frequency curves. And maybe I can sit down with you and look at some of that data and see if it makes sense or not.
We'll totally like that. So I'll move on. I hope we can spend some time to talk about it. And another time, I guess. And then the last check that we did was to make sure that we review the spatial consistency between the feeding of the curves, that we don't, have a weird an inconsistency between two index points who are adjacent to one another. So we did all these checks to make sure that our, feedings were pretty well aligned. And then finally, we also make a reality check to the rainfall runoff model results, because we just didn't want to, like you say, Joe, I think we extrapolate, but we also want to make sure that, physically it was possible, and based on our hydrologic model. So the reality check that we did was to look, to show how the disaggregation of the accumulation of this precipitation through runoff and snowpack. So this graph shows how much runoff and snow is accumulated at different elevations during the major flood. I think it's very similar to the graphic that I showed a few slides before. The graph on the left represents the Sacramento Basin under the climate change scenario, the no climate change scenario. And the blue bar represents the runoff. The brown bar represents the snowpack. And you can see that on the right side, we have the median climate change scenario. And you can see how a lot of snowpack has been converted to runoff because it's increasing in temperature. There's still some remaining snowpack quantity, but most of it is gone with the high climate change scenario. The same graphic for the San Joaquin River Basin for the 97 events. And the change of runoff, the contribution of the snowpack under the climate change scenario is as important as the Sacramento, but you still have a lot of snowpack remaining. So during the high climate change scenario, you're still going to have a further increase in stream flow runoff. So how does the climate change ratio look like? So that's just a sample. We have these ratios for hundreds of points in the Sacramento Central Valley. The top graph represents the exceedance interval for and the climate change ratio for the Sacramento River, and then the bottom graph represents the San Joaquin ratios. We can see that on the Sacramento region, we arrive to it like a point where like all the curves are converging. Is that mean that physically there is little chance that we're going to have larger runoff for the most extreme scenario, because physically we melt all the snowpack. There is really less snowpack left during these major events, and so you have a convergence of these curves, of these ratios. On the San Joaquin, you see that these curves are not converging quite that yet for the most extreme scenarios, because you still have a great quantity of snowpack, especially with the larger, the high climate change scenarios.
Roman?
Yes.
Could you go back a second?
Yes.
What is the y-axis? It's titled climate change ratio. What's it a ratio of?
So you remember my first slide will show like the step-by-step process of our climate change analysis. This ratio is the and I can go back to the graphic, but it's really based on the 97 years of data, we fit the curve, right, the distribution of flow frequency curve, the annual exceedance probability, and we divide it. That's for the baseline for a specific duration, and we divide it by the climate change scenarios. So if I was to compare the CBHS unregulated flow with our hydrologic model, unregulated flow for the baseline, the curve should be almost one throughout the relationship. It starts to deviate a little bit because the data is a little bit slightly different for the baseline, but in general, it's like follow the 1-to-1 ratio. Now with the climate change, we compare our unregulated rainfall runoff unregulated flow frequency curve for this 3D duration to the free climate change scenarios. That's how they have been computed.
So at the 0.5, which would be the 2-year event, say on the San Joaquin, we're saying that the low would be less than 1, so it'd actually be less flow at the 2-year.
That's correct.
More extreme one, it would be 1.25, so it'd be 25% more at the 2-year level. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then if we go out to the 100-year level, 0.01, it like goes from 1.25 up to 2.5. Is that
That's
how
correct.
to read it? Okay, thank you.
That's correct.
I just wanted to understand it.
Yep. So now I'm going to change gears. So this information is being fed into our iPass softwares and to adjust the unregulated flow frequency curve from the CVHS hydrology. And then because we do the transpose from unregulated to regulated, the unregulated flow frequency curve will be adjusted based on the statistic of the unreg. So now I'm going to change gears. I'm going to jump into the title sea level rise influence. So we're using the same approach as 2017 CVFPB updates. Just a recapitulation, in 2017, we used the National Research Council 2012 information that was at the time the best available information. And it was about 1.3 feet of sea level rise by late century. This round, we are using the California Oceanography Protection Council documents who has been updated 2018, and they have different level of sea level rise. They have a low, a medium high, and an extreme. And we selected the medium high for two reasons. The first one is just explicitly based on the recommendation from the Ocean Protection Council. We say the medium high should be used for less adaptive, more vulnerable projects or population that will experience medium to high consequences as a result of underestimating sea level rise. So I think that's the strong statement. We could have gone based on the recommendation to the extreme. My fear about that was that no model of the delta could have handled the more extreme scenarios. And so you arrive to a zone of, brackish. To me, that, was very hard to have a sense of reality check. So we stick with the medium high. So for the 2022 CVFPB, the medium high corresponds to 3.68 feet. And then we did some additional simulation to refine the delta hydraulics. And for the flood risk analysis specifically, is really a deterministic approach that we're using, right? We're fixing our 3.68 feet, and then for this median high risk aversion. But it's also consistent with other efforts from the state agencies. There is a documentation which just came out in 2020, making California coast resilient to sea level rise principles for aligned state action. And the recommendation, again, is to utilize a minimum of 3.5 feet for sea level rise by 2050. So again, we're meeting the standards that are recommendation in, our community. But we also did some sensitivity analysis on the side to have a sense of like the probability of the distribution of sea level rise. So it's a probabilistic approach to understand sea level rise sensitivity, where we use multiple scenarios representing the 100-year and 200-year flood with a range of sea level rise from 0 to 6 feet to have a sense of how broad, the range can be. So you can combine our free climate change scenarios with the baseline with multiple levels sea level rise. And the end goal for that is to compare and contrast our results with the Delta Stewardship Council and their Delta Adapt initiative. My sense is that, we are going to arrive to some sort of consensus of what is a driver in flood risk in the Delta from one side to another based on this information. So on that, I'm going to let Steve tackle the next geotechnical engineering.
Good morning, board members and stakeholders. Thank you, Ruben. My name is Steve Cowden. I'm an economist with Florida Resources. I've had the opportunity to be involved with these risk analysis, starting with the comp study. So about 20 years experience working with these. It's been a privilege to do so. And it's been a privilege to work with the board members during this time. Some of you I recognize over all the years. So to start with, you're going to have an economist talking about geotechnical engineering. So there's a caveat here. You have an economist talking about geotech, but that's where I'm going to start. And we use geotechnical engineering to estimate levee reliability and formulate suggested improvements. Okay, next slide. So basically, when we're talking about levee performance, we're talking about the fragility curves. And these curves show the probability of levee failure for various channel stages. When the geotech engineers are assembling these curves, they have several categories, technical categories they're looking at. And when they're evaluating these for each specific levee, they're also incorporating the uncertainties, at least in their minds, that also apply. And down at the bottom there, you see an example of a fragility curve with the channel water surface elevation relationship with the levee probability failures. Okay, next slide. So for question? Okay, for 2017, we relied on DWR's urban levee evaluation and not urban levee evaluation program, which included detailed geotechnical analysis of levee performance. There was some additional geotechnical investigations to refine the curves at selected index points. So for 2020-22, what we did, we collected new information, that related to our 2017 assumptions as to which projects would be in place, both for our existing conditions, which are now 2022, and for our future conditions. As a result of this new information, we updated 40 curves using new data, and basically we improved the fragility curves, 40 points based upon new information. But we also found 32 points, 32 levees where the changes that we anticipated in 2017 hadn't occurred or were not likely to occur. So we actually changed those in the opposite direction. So the changes worked in both directions here for fragility curves. Okay. Okay, moving on to economics. In economics, we estimate flood damages and life safety, changes in flood damages and life safety. And kind of central to the economic analysis are the inventories, which include the numbers and values and locations of assets that are at flood risk. Okay. So the key enhancement we're going to talk about in economics is the structural inventory update, and we'll show you how we did that. Over time, our inventories have changed. To do the risk analysis, we use river basin impact areas. For the comp study, we had about 110 of these. And for 2022, I think we had 107 of these. So these have not changed very much over time. The geographic regions where we do the analysis and collect the inventory information. When we collect our asset information, we assign it to damage categories. The comp study was pretty much the standard structural categories: residential, commercial, industrial, and public, and we included crops. But over time, we've expanded these damage categories to include other types of losses, including what we call loss of function, such as business loss or emergency costs. In other words, we lose functions of a residential structure or a commercial structure, and therefore we lose the functions, the income associated with that. So we've now included that. So you can see there over time, in addition to the structural categories, we've included business loss, emergency costs, vehicles, road damage, and life loss. All of those damage categories are monetized except life loss, which we do not monetize. Okay, next slide. So starting with the structural component of the inventory, we rely on parcel data. When we did the comp study, some counties had digitized county assessor parcel maps and data, but several didn't. And so for those counties, we had to rely on geocoded street addresses, and we actually had hard copies of the parcel plat maps and had to determine where actual parcels and structures were located on that information. It was kind of a laborious process. Fortunately, by the time we got to 2012, Parcel Quest in Folsom, they had digitized county assessor data for all counties. So we used that for the 2012 CVFPB. That data we used was based on 2010 assessor information. When it came to the 2017 update, we did not update the structured inventory, so we kept that same 2010 Parcel Quest information. But by the time we got to our current analysis, 2022, we have updated that with 2019 land vision data. So this is a significant enhancement. We're going to come back to that a couple of times. And so you can see over time, how these are number of structures, how they've increased over time. So right now we're about 301,000 structures in the Sacramento Basin and about 109,000 structures in the San Joaquin. Okay, next slide. Now for crops, for many years for these risk analysis, we used DWR's GIS county land use surveys. For a long time, DWR did individual surveys of counties, GIS surveys of land use. The land and water use section could not possibly do all 58 counties every year. So as it turned out, you might do a handful, maybe half a dozen every year. So when we were using these, some of those were very, very recent. But some of them might have been like 10 years old. So they varied over the years. So we use that information up through the 2017 update. However, for the 2022 update, DWR has now switched to statewide satellite land use information. So for 2022, we're using the 2016 survey. So again, you can kind of see the change in acres over time. So for Sacramento, we're over 1 million acres now. San Joaquin, about 612,000 acres. For our future conditions for 2072, the comp study and the 2012 CVFPB, we did not include future growth. Those were basically existing condition analysis. But in 2017, we started looking at future conditions, and we're doing the same for 2022. Population sources, the 2012 CBFPP used 2000 census information as a base. The 2017 and 22 updates, the base information is still 2010 census. However, there's a lot of other information that's available so that we can update that. And DWR demographics has helped us do that updating of that information. Okay. So talking a little bit more about comparison between 2017 and 2022. So you see some differences here, significant differences. For 2017, the analysis years, the existing condition at that time was 2017. The future condition was 2067, a 50-year analysis period. But we also included 2007, and we did that to take a look at the effect of the early implementation program, DWR's EIP program, which started right after 2007 and lasted several years. And a lot of improvements, especially in the Sacramento Basin. So we tried to capture that. So that's why we included 2007 or the 2017 analysis. For 2022, we're using 2022 as the existing condition, 2072 is a future condition. We no longer are looking at 2007, so we moved on from that analysis. So basically, we have some different analysis years. We have no change in impact areas, no change in the damage categories, but number of structures. For both basins, the difference between 2017 and 2022 is about 62,000 structures. Now remember, this is basically because this is a 10-year update, because in 2017 we used 2010 data, and 2022 we're using 2019. So this is about a 10-year update here on the structures. The crop acres over from 2017 to 2022 have increased by about 313,000 acres. I was a little surprised when I saw this originally, but I think there was probably several factors, underneath this, explain this. But I think one of the key factors is just the change, the significant change in how we measure, DWR measures crop acres from the individual county land use surveys over many years to one statewide survey, satellite survey. So I have a feeling that explains most of it, but I don't have all the answers on that. But other than that, we are including an additional 312,000 acres in our risk analysis for 2022. Okay, next slide. Same thing for population. The increase in population from 2017 to 2022 is about almost 69,000 people. And this is a measure over 5 years. The structure change you saw is 10 years, but this really is a measurement over 5 years because we had the information to do that. Okay, next slide. Just kind of summarize for the inventory update, we have new land vision parcel data, which was statewide. And we also had access to Microsoft building footprints. Previously in the risk analysis, we located structures using the parcel centroid. And so we didn't have the exact location of the structure, nor did we have a good look as to its footprint, but we have that now. And we've switched to the 2016 statewide land use, the satellite land use. For our valuation, we're using RS means 2021 information. Basically, this is our dollars per square foot and depreciation information. We have GIS spatial representation of all inventories. And that last point, coordinating with the Corps, and in particular, the Hydrologic Engineering Center in Davis. When we started this risk analysis, we asked HEC if we could use the NSI. They had developed the NSI for Corps to use nationwide. and we were trying to be consistent with the Corps' data and methods. Conversations with HEC, they informed us that, well, they couldn't share it with us because of the parcel license restrictions. However, they did suggest to us that if we could provide them our parcel information, our land division parcel data, they could develop a CSI, or a California Structural Inventory for the state, the whole state, and that we could use. So we agreed to do this. We provided that information to them, and they provided an inventory back to us, that CSI. In particular, that CSI, one of the key advantages of that is how the Corps assigns population to structures. They assign population to not only residential structures, but to commercial and industrial structures based on commuting patterns. They assign that population based on time of day, during the day or nighttime, and by the age of the people, under 65 and over 65. So this was a huge achievement, and I hope we can continue with this, going forward. But that population information in that inventory is really critical for our life safety analysis, which is in the next slide. So here I'm going to talk about how we enhanced our life safety analysis from our 2017 analysis. For all of these analyses, 2012, 17, and now 2022, we keep going back and looking at flood warning timelines. Cindy Matthews from the National Weather Service is a central person that helps us with this. She's familiar with all the emergency management agencies, in the valley, and so we rely on her information to update the flood warning timelines. For 2017, we now use two methods to evaluate life safety. The first method is consistent with what we did in 2017 as well as 2012. Basically, within the FDA inventories, we go in and we replace the structure depreciated replacement values with number of people. And we replace the depth damage function with the depth mortality function. That's all within FDA. And then we run FDA and we get expected annual life loss. So we're still doing that for 2017. However, the Corps has recently developed a model, HEC Lifestem, that its sole purpose is to evaluate life safety, for dam failures or for levee failures, and that's its sole purpose. And so we decided we were going to use that, for 2022, because this incorporates dynamic warning and evacuation timelines in conjunction with when the flooding actually occurs at individual structures. We decided also that we couldn't do this for all of our 107 impact areas because of cost and time. So we selected 20 urban and small community impact areas that we felt would have the greatest life safety issues, and we applied it for those impact areas only. So we have two methods now. Okay. Next slide. So some of the essential elements of that Lifestem analysis, it begins with an initial distribution of people. The hazard is detected. A warning is issued. People decide if they're going to respond or not, and some may not. I think we're kind of familiar with the hurricane parties. For those who do decide to respond, then there's different methods. They can respond on foot, by car, or if they're in a multi-story building, they could, shelter in place by going upstairs. So all those factors are what we call the evacuation effectiveness. The flood characteristics are also another essential element. Obviously, the arrival time, depth, and velocity, extent. The shelter provided by their final location for people who decide to evacuate, and are they caught in their cars as they're trying to evacuate. And then finally, the fatality rates or the death mortality function. Okay, next slide. So we're going to come to the punchline of the analysis here. Just to get a quick recap here. Next slide. On the economic side, we've updated the parcel information. We've updated the land use information. We've enhanced the life safety analysis, which is the next slide. So we're ready to present to you our preliminary results. This is the punchline. Now, one caveat. Okay, Rob. One caveat before we get there is these are very preliminary. We received these on Monday. That was this past Monday, just a couple days ago. So we've just started the ground truthing of these. So you can't take these to the bank yet. But we obviously wanted to share these with you. And so with that caveat, keep that in mind. Next slide, Roman. So here we have expected annual statistical lives lost. The Sacramento Basins, San Joaquin Basin. The blue area are for without project conditions. The two analysis years are 2022 and 2072, the future. The orange area, the orangish area, is with project or with the state system-wide investment approaches. So for lives lost, you can see for the Sacramento Basin, the two areas, there's quite a bit of overlap there, which perhaps isn't too surprising given all the improvements that have occurred in the Sacramento Basin. But look at San Joaquin. So now that blue area, by the time we get to 2072, these show the range of uncertainty. So the top dot is the high climate change scenario, the middle dot on all of these is the medium, and the lower dot is the low climate change scenario. So by 2072, where these climate changes, ranges kick in, you're now seeing the effect of those scenarios on lives lost. Then there's quite a bit of uncertainty. And we've talked about it. Joe and Michael have talked about it. And we talked about it during the investment strategy presentation. The uncertainty. Well, here you're starting to see what you're seeing, the effect of that climate change uncertainty bands on lives lost for the two basins over the 50 years. Let me go to the next slide. These are expected annual damages. Again, for Sacramento, there's overlap there. But for San Joaquin, the difference is even greater. So I think, again, this is very preliminary information, but I think there's some observations here we can safely make. The first is we have noticed that these graphs are very similar, are very consistent to the graphs we obtained for the 2017 analysis, which is very, very encouraging. We changed it a lot in 2022, but really the shapes of these trends seem very consistent. So that's very encouraging. Also, as I look at these I'm thinking that, depending upon once we get the final plots, obviously, but it seems to me that there's more opportunities for this to be gained in the San Joaquin Basin based upon these big differences here. But again, this is preliminary information, so don't post it. Hey, here's our results. Don't take it to the bank yet. Don't deposit it. But this is what we have so far. So with that, I think I'm ready to turn it over to Darren for the summary.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I know, and Roman, that's a big lift getting us to the life safety and flood damages, but hopefully that chain of models is coming into focus for folks. So a quick recap of the key takeaways in the updated analysis are that we're building off and enhancing the chain of models from 2017. I think you've heard that enough times. That's the main objective here. We have used the climate change, low, median, and high future scenarios to demonstrate the uncertainty in the risk analysis for future conditions. We've incorporated updated geotech data into the probability of levee failure and utilized an enhanced structure inventory to increase the resolution of population and property in the floodplain. We've also enhanced the life safety analysis tools and methods. Some key takeaways from the climate change analysis on the next slide gives us clear view of the relationship between warming temperatures and increased flows. Less areas above freezing temperature is emphasizing the relationship of less snow resulting in more rain. And the comparison Roman provided that our major storms that we're familiar with in our historical record will be warmer in the future. Next slide. More rain is translated to runoff with a higher snowline elevation, or to say another way, more watershed area below the snowline elevation will contribute to runoff when compared to present day climate. All future scenarios show an increase in runoff, and the high scenario is showing significant increases. And I think also of note in that observation is the low climate change scenario also increasing that that runoff. So these increases result in higher flood peaks, and as Roman demonstrated, a doubling of the flood peaks in the San Joaquin on that high climate change scenario. This is of great importance to our planning and to our efforts going forward. Also, that the San Joaquin watersheds have more potential for higher runoff. So we need to really monitor what's happening and make sure that can fold into our analysis going forward. So to reiterate what Steve said and Mary's comment in the comments, I see there too, the life safety and flood damages results are hot off the press. So these are considered preliminary draft results. The team is diving into the detailed quality assurance methods as we speak. Also, we are scheduling a more focused presentation in August with the RFMPs from the San Joaquin and Sacramento Basins separately, where we plan to get into more details, more Q&A, get into the nitty-gritty a bit further. But that being said, our team is here to answer questions today. Thank you very much for having us.
There are some comments in chat, but I'm not seeing any hands raised. So if you'd like to ask a question, Joe Countryman, your hand is raised.
I just feel that this is really an encouraging presentation that was made here, and I didn't actually understand that with the plan, we have such a great reduction in the damages in the San Joaquin as compared to the Sacramento. I think it's extremely encouraging that, I mean, I've kind of had the feeling like, geez, the San Joaquin is lost. There's nothing we can do. But this looks, if these hold up, I mean, you're saying they're preliminary. If they hold up, it shows, no, we can do a lot here. So I'm very encouraged by it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, same here. Same here.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, it just emphasizes that effort on Hillary's part of where we invest.
And if I may, Joe, I wanted to just jump in on that. I mean, that was in what I always refer to as the hockey stick graphics from the 2017 plan update. And Hillary showed it again with that pie chart showing the diversity of the type of investments that we do have planned in the San Joaquin. A lot of those investments are really about going through and finding some basically transitory storage as the water's moving through the system, either up in the reservoirs or down in the basically the flatter valley areas out there. And it really is an effective way. So I think that is a key takeaway message point.
Bill Eisenstein, you had a question in chat. Do you want to go ahead and ask that?
Yes, thanks. I was just curious if the expected annual damages and expected annual lives lost findings, once they're finalized, could ultimately be disaggregated to the RFMP regional scale, because those would be really valuable pieces of information for the regions.
I think that the team has been discussing doing that. I don't think we have not done that in the past, so that's still under discussion. But I could see that being helpful when we get to those RFP meetings. Yes, but we're discussing that right now.
Thank you.
I guess I have another comment. I'd like to give you some praise. I think Hillary's and this presentation, the graphics are so much improved from what I've seen in the past, so much more understandable. You've really done a lot of work to make this understandable for maybe the less knowledgeable like myself. But I think you did a really great job with it. Thank you.
You're welcome. And that is a lot of credit goes to the consultant teams when putting this information together, and not to mention the running the models FDA. It's just been we've had phenomenal help from all our consultants.
We've
Kathy
achieved
Schaefer,
the
you have a
goal.
question?
Okay. Go ahead, Kathy.
All right, I'll read Kathy's question. I will ask people, even if you post a question in chat, please ask it. We are recording this for the benefit of the peer reviewers who will be looking at the climate change analysis. Kathy asked if the 2017 climate scenario was discarded in light of the 2022 climate scenario, and that was directed at Romain.
It's not discarded because we're going to do performance tracking. So we're going to be able to compare our notes from 2017 and look at the climate change scenarios side by side. When I compare 2017 median condition to 2022 median condition, even if the timeline is slightly different, the underlying unregulated flow coming into the delta, at least so far, is very similar. That means to me that downscaling processes, even if they are improving, doesn't necessarily change the outcome of the results. I think what's important to point out is like the uncertainty band, and he just, I would not call it the worst case scenario. We're trying to provide kind of a reasonable range, but there may be situation or a future condition may be more extreme depending on how a society respond to greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you. Joe, your hand is raised. Did you have another question? Nope. Okay.
No question.
Hey, Kim, this is Bill. Roman, did I understand you to say that you've chosen the medium to high projection to, move forward, and that Delta adapts? My understanding is they've chosen the worst case, so that when we compare those, our projections or your projections with theirs, Delta adapts. It's going to be based on different assumptions.
So we in the CVFPB 2022, we're going to compare the low, median, and high. We're going to do these three values. I would not discard the low, but as an engineer, I'd rather be a little bit more conservative than optimistic in general. Regarding Delta Stewardship Council and the Delta Adapt, I think there is the underlying data that we're using is the same. So we're using the CVHS hydrology, and we're using similar general circulation models. Projection or the data underneath is the same. However, the procedures that we're using are slightly different. Delta Adapt is using a more probabilistic distribution of climate change, where they have a range and they attribute a 200-year flood based on this range of future conditions. We are using more some sort of deterministic procedures, where we fix our sea level rise. We don't look at the whole range of sea level rise to do our flood risk analysis. However, we will compare notes with the Delta Stewardship Council on the range piece, because we have these three scenarios, these three inland climate change scenario, we're going to be able to see how the range compare. And then on silverize, we did some sensitivity analysis who is not falling into the flood risk analysis or expecting annual damage and life loss, but we're going to be able to compare our stage in the delta on how, if they overlap. That will inform us, depending on your location in the delta, if future investments need to be more fixed on sea level rise or inland climate change. And you'll see that in the San Joaquin, delta piece where, up to Stockton, I think everybody knows that like the inland climate change is really the driver. And when you arrive to the ship channel, is a mixture of sea level rise and inland climate change, for example.
Okay, I'm thinking to forward to the Delta Council's consideration of this information. Are we going to be in a position to be able to say that the technical analyses of both delta adapts and the 2020 flood plan are essentially the same? It's just a matter of looking the way we're looking at the data, or how are we going to explain that to the board?
Yeah, we have a list of talking points that we have developed between the Delta Ship Council and DWR that we will be using moving forward. I think I see Mike here, but we need to recognize that like the two efforts are different purposes, first of all, and then secondly, on the technical analysis, the underlying data is going to be the same. However, the approach are slightly different, but the outcome of it, the findings are going to be very similar.
Complementary.
Yeah.
And Bill, just to kind of reiterate what Roman's saying is, to me, they're consistent. They're just not the same. And there's been a lot of coordination, as Ian indicated, between the department and the Stewardship Council on those assumptions. And we're just asking slightly different questions. So that's why the presentation appears a little different, but they do generally agree. And I think Roman nailed it. The outcomes are pointing to the same basic conclusions.
Okay, so that when the presentation is made to the board, they can say that the technical teams have coordinated their presentations and agree on the basic fundamental data. Is that right?
Correct. And I
Right.
I want to add we will have a joint presentation at FMA in September. So we're working on comparing notes right now as we speak.
Okay, before it goes to the council, you're going to present that to FMA before it goes to the council?
At least that not the flood risk, the EAD and more like the flow frequency curve and stage frequency curve distribution.
Okay,
so it would be more a technical presentation than really.
Okay, I thought the Delta adapts decision was going to be made in the next couple of months, not in September. Am I off on that?
I cannot talk for that.
Yeah, I don't know, Bill, when that's on their agenda. FMA, just as a reminder, for people who aren't familiar, is that first week of September. So they're pretty close.
Okay, well, we might raise that because I'm not sure it makes sense to get some policy recommendations before everybody's ready. But anyway.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to promote any policy recommendation during the presentation. It's going to be purely technical, comparing the different model outcome and comparing notes.
And in fact, it'll probably be a conversation kind of similar to what we've been having here with you, Joe, and the other members that are participating in the coordinating committee today, where it's kind of looking at the data and better understanding what's being seen there. That's the advantage of FMA.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Something I wanted to just reiterate out there, it was in Hillary's presentation, and Darren brought it up at the beginning here, is, there's a lot that's new in the technical work here that we've presented, but what you haven't seen is a lot that the team would have liked to have done, but didn't have the time and resources to do that. And this graphic that Romain has here is actually a pretty good one out here, in that you can see literally the discrete data points from their modeling scenarios, where they're talking about 2022 conditions and then the 2072 conditions. And you'll remember, there's going back to Kathy's question, we had data from 2017 where we did some different years, and then in 2012 there's different points. What we haven't started doing, because the assumptions are a little different, right? They're each assumption's a little different, so things don't quite fit together. Is getting to a point where we can actually show our effectiveness over time, looking at where we started in 2007, where we're at in 2012, what the system was like in 2017, what it's going to be like in 2022, and then those further out periods, because we do have this rolling period out there. And the reason I'm putting it out there, I'm really asking Bill, you and the board members to maybe hopefully recognize that at the technical team, we see value in looking at those smaller increments of change too, because what we get out of that is the effectiveness of a lot of the lower cost, lower hanging fruit actions that Hillary was talking about. Some of those in progress actions, as they come online and get done, you can see the incremental value. And maybe a discussion for another time, and I can do it with a coordinating committee, or I'm happy to talk to you offline about it. I bring in some of the technical team. Is in the 2017 plan, we did have a robust recommendation for us to start doing baseline tracking. And we feel getting those finer scale data will help justify not only the small things, but that phased approach that I was talking to Joe about like 45 minutes ago or so here, which has been a stumbling block for a lot of our large Army Corps projects out there, is what are these hydraulic impacts? How can you go through and do it? We take the big fruit, but what we leave behind are a lot of the smaller things that are really important for things like the Yellow Partnership, where those little projects are what bring that coalition of cost share partners and local entities together and really lead to that resilient portfolio that Hillary's advocating for in the investment strategy. So I think there is a strong connection between the investment strategy and the technical work, and I'm hoping that when we move into 2027's planning cycle, that we can have some teams that can go through and look at those smaller data points and use them in advocacy with our federal partners for more of these incremental approaches, both for the small projects as well as breaking these bigger projects into smaller phases and showing that there is this system view that we're achieving out here, because we're all trying to, in this case, get down to numbers there that are in the orange graphics that we're showing down, that we're trying to decrease those damages or slow the rate of damages out there. So there's tons of work left, but the team does spend a lot of time thinking about what the next step should be. And you guys, a lot of you don't get to see that. So I just wanted to highlight that. And, we have people like Roman here who, he's talking about what he's doing now, but he's been talking to me about what he'd like to do next. And I'm really excited about where this team's ideas are going.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Maybe this was asked before, but and I'm sorry if I missed it. What is the timeline for the peer review? You said you had the panel of the peer review team. What's that schedule look like?
So I can talk about it. So we already have convened, we had a kickoff meeting earlier this week. We are going to provide them the 2017 documentation as well as peer-reviewed documentation that has been done. We are planning to start providing them all the information by August, for the end of August, so the 1st of September. And then they will have all the material by then, at least all the draft technical analysis will be provided to them at that point. And then they have 30 days to get their documentation and information together. And I believe there is another 30 days. I think like the end project is going to be November, the end of November. That's a hope.
Okay. Thank you. Last call for questions. Thank you so much to the team. That was a great presentation, and we appreciate all the work that went into pulling that together for today. Ryan, you can stop recording now. Thank you for doing that. And